The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So what is the real story with Jayden Daniels and the health of his ribs? The head coach the other day went out of the way to say he's healthy now. Jayden Daniels asked about being wrapped up as he comes off the field, as he has been in the last few weeks. Says, the weather's getting colder. I just need to warm up a little bit. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's embellished a little bit. Maybe it's just to keep the ribs warm. How healthy is Jayden Daniels? And as Tom Lavero wrote the other day, if you're a fan and the way he's played the last couple of weeks, you kind of hope he's hurt. Not that you want him to be hurt, but you also don't want to look at the possibility that he's fallen off the cliff. And I don't think that's happened. I think injury has played a role here. I think you listen to people who are really savvy about this, like Ron Jaworski, who say, you watch him play, you can see he's not completely healthy. And he doesn't seem to have the same zip, the same burst. And optimistically, and it's an odd way to look at this, but optimistically, you want to say it's because he's hurt. Because if this is going to be the Jayden Daniels moving forward, well, the carriage turned into a pumpkin pretty quickly, didn't it? I don't think that's the case. I think it's more about injury. But this was Dan Quinn on Monday, and he didn't even wait for the question. This is how he opened up his news conference.
Jayden is not injured right now, but we did lose valuable practice time, John, with him and his teammates when he was injured. And that's hard on all the guys. It's a really, really important part of what we do. And we don't have banked reps in years. So we're very much looking forward to getting back onto a full week and regular practice sessions with the guys. So over the last few weeks, we've had to, put that together in small bits. So that's what I think into that space. And as we're heading into this week, we're looking forward to getting a full week of our practice and, work the things that we need to.
Jayden is not injured right now. Remember that, right now. Okay, so he's recovered. But, it does seem to open the door that he's been playing hurt the last few weeks, right? He was hurt in a game last month against Carolina, came back in the Bears game at the end of October, at the end of last month, and had they not had the Hail Mary, and you got to have, some zip to be able to throw it 65 yards in the air as he did, but without the Hail Mary, that's a loss. And now you have a team that's got 3 losses in 4 games and a season that's beginning to unravel. Now it's just back-to-back losses. But this Daniels yesterday, when asked what is accomplished when he comes off the field and they do put that wrap around his ribs.
It's to stay warm. It's getting later in the years, it gets colder. You don't want your body parts to get cold, so it's just to stay warm.
Okay. Well, you can buy that on face value if you want, but we've seen quarterbacks play in cold weather for 100 years. We've seen games in Green Bay and other cold weather places where the quarterback doesn't come off the field and get a wrap on his ribs to warm up. It's got to be something there. There's also this with Daniels, and I don't think you discount it. He is going into his 12th start of the season on Sunday against the Dallas Cowboys. And if you throw in the preseason, even though he didn't play much, that's a long, long season. It's already now a longer season than college seasons. And even when they play 12 games in college, they get a couple of bye weeks along the way. And then if they are in a bowl game, you got this nice long stretch before you do it. Here's start number 12 coming up, and there's still going to be 5 regular season games to go. And if things go well, they get into the playoffs. So this is something new for him. And as he said yesterday, something that he really couldn't prepare for.
I don't really think you could plan for that. Like, you get little tidbits from vets, but, it's when they tell you, like, I remember a lot of people told us, like, this is going to be the longest year of your life. So from last college game to pre-draft and to now, it's a very long season, but, that just comes with the growing pains of, your first year in the NFL.
Yeah, and everybody goes through it, and it doesn't go perfectly. In fact, in the next hour, I'm going to play some of a conversation from yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show with John Elway, who, as great as he became, and he's one of the greatest to ever play the game, and if you want to make the argument he was the best, you could do that, because the first 3 Super Bowls that he got to with the Broncos, that was on his back. Those were not good teams, and they got their lunch handed to them all 3 times by the Giants, by the Redskins, and the 49ers beat him 55-10, which may still be the biggest blowout in Super Bowl history. But he got them there because he was John Elway. But he struggled at the beginning. He was the number one pick, and he got benched in his rookie year. He was so bad he got benched. And we'll play what he said about that coming up in the next hour. Meantime, other adjustments that this team has to be concerned about, and what happened in Philadelphia a week ago today, right? Yeah, it was a Thursday night game. They took Terry away. Terry McLaurin didn't do really anything of much note in that game because he was taken out. I don't think they even targeted him in the first half. And, football's all about adjustments. They do this to you to take this away. What do you do to counter? And Quinn was asked about this yesterday. Is this something that you now have to address as a team, that Philadelphia may have shown the rest of the league what it takes to take away your best receiver?
It's going to come back to us and the way that we execute and play. And so we weren't pleased with our own style and execution of how we did it. But like I said, that's not to give them, I don't want to take away from their performance. And how do we adjust? We get to do that again in a month or so. And so we'll look forward to that. But in the meantime, back to our own structure to go. And if we do see a team trying to employ something that was effective, we generally keep that alive in our practice reps over the next 3 or 4 weeks, even if they don't have it, just to say, okay, a team may try that, to your point.
And in that vein, actually kind of already touched on it, but maybe a little bit deeper, when you have a tendency that's pretty firm, pretty strong, and has been successful, but one team maybe kind of cracks the code, is one opponent enough to get you to kind of come off that tendency, or do you need more opponents to say, like, hey, we figured this out?
For sure, to say, like, one's some, two's, an occurrence, but three's a pattern to me. So I would say you're always looking to say, is there why one moment or one play in that way. But, I have a sense that some of that math will change.
Okay. So, and they'll probably get better against Dallas. The secondary for them is a mess. In fact, the whole team is an absolute mess. The question is, do you have hangover from Philadelphia and, for that matter, Pittsburgh? I mean, this is really where you're gonna get things done in the second half of the season. You got, last little more than a third of the season. You got Dallas twice. You got Philadelphia. You got a Tennessee team at home that you can beat. Maybe a deceptively tough game that they will face going on the road after the bye, playing at New Orleans. That might be a tough game. Atlanta seems to be fading. So there's, a lot of winnable games in these last 6. But can they do it? And can they come back from 2 really disappointing performances, particularly what happened in Philadelphia a week ago tonight? Austin Eckler, vet, loves the microphone, loves the spotlight, heading for a career after football and broadcasting, clearly. Here's what he says about coming back and rebounding after a couple of tough losses.
DQ said it best. We're battle-tested. We've been through some battles. We've seen, the good side and the bad side of kind of wins and losses. Hey, where we're really close. But, hey, we just fell short. Or, hey, we made it over the hump and we put the game together. And knowing what both of those feel like as a team together is great, because we know, hey, we want to make sure we can do everything to prevent, those things that we know we can when it comes to those losses, things that we feel like, okay, if we would have done this, there's some little small details that we can get down that the game is about. And so now it comes back to us, especially coming off the Thursday game, coming back, putting those details together, making sure we're coaching those up, holding each other accountable, holding ourselves accountable, putting it together, and then going against a division opponent and let it loose.
DQ talked about how important like a regular practice week is and just kind of getting back into a normal flow. How does that impact you in the offense, kind of getting back to where you were so efficient earlier in the season?
Yeah, practice is one of the most important things when it comes to the season. Obviously, it's the thing we do most, and it's no different early in the season, late in the season. The tempo and the speed might be a little bit different, but you still need to get the reps. You need to get the repetition. You need to have the muscle memory because we do have different plays in. And so for us to get in sync with Jayden, with the O-line, right, with the speed of all of that and the catching the ball and seeing the rhythm, seeing it out of his hand, getting the blocks, making the calls, making the checks, the protection, all of that, run checks, pass checks. There's a lot that goes in, so you got to make sure that when you're getting out there, you had some repetition, so you've been here before, you've been in this situation, and it feels natural to you.
This will be your first time playing in this rivalry. How much did you know about it just being in the league before and growing up watching football, and how excited are you to play in this rivalry?
Yeah, I was with the Chargers for the past 7 years, so I know all about the division rivals, just as every team does, and so I know it's no different over here in this division. And so it's a head-to-head matchup, and it's one of those where I remember. You go against a division rival. There's always a game that seems like it's always a tougher game, as far just because we know each other, we're familiar with each other from playing each other for so long. So I'm sure it's going to be the same.
Has anybody with the organization, maybe Doug Williams or something, talked about the history of just the Commanders and the Cowboys franchises and just the different?
Actually, our media team does a good job giving us a little history lesson. Usually, we do a couple highlight videos throughout the week, and they'll show us some of the history of the rivalries. They did that last week with the Eagles.
Well, hopefully it goes a little bit better with the history lesson for this week. By the way, and we'll talk about it next week, 1 week from today is the 50th anniversary of the Clint Longley game, the Thanksgiving game in Dallas, where Roger Staubach got hurt, and Clint Longley, who hadn't played, had been the third stringer at the beginning of the year, but they had traded Craig Morton, the backup, and he came off the bench and he threw 2 touchdown bombs, including one to Drew Pearson at the end of the game, to absolutely spoil Thanksgiving. So I don't know if they included that in the history lesson, but I would have. That would have been motivating for me. For these guys, they're all obviously all too young to remember that, but that is all a big part of the history. I spent some time yesterday trying to decipher exactly what this is going to mean going forward after what came down and the other day with the House committee, where the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee passed the RFK Stadium bill, which would allow the land that's owned by the Department of Natural Resources, in other words, federal land, turning it over to the district where the city would have the control, and that would pave the way for a stadium. But there is still, as Tom Lavero writes in the Times today, opposition by Maryland Senators Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin. And that may not be as easy a hurdle as you might think. Now, the senator from Montana who had been against this, Steve Daines, because he was working in the interest of the family of Walter Blackie Wetzel, who designed the logo that they wore in the helmet for almost 50 years, starting in 1972, that he wanted to have them recognized by the team, which apparently has satisfied both him and the family. So they're going to move forward now with no opposition from Steve Daines. But what does that mean in terms of how quickly and if possible this can all be voted on by the Senate by the end of the year, because that's the deadline. Otherwise, it gets tabled till next year, and who knows, where it goes from there. But as Lavero writes, Dan Snyder had turned away the family several years ago when they sought ownership of the logo to repurpose it in service of Indian issues. This year, it wound up costing the team and RFK supporters valuable months before the issue was finally resolved to the satisfaction of Daines and the Wetzels, which is true. I mean, we're in November now. This has got to get done by the end of next month. If this hadn't been held up, this might have made it possible or more possible that there'll be a Senate vote before the end of the year. So that's where it stands right now, and it only takes one nay vote from a senator to keep this from happening. And it could be Van Hollen, could be Cardin, it could be others who might be opposed to this. Also, as Tom writes, attached to a larger spending bill, for example, rather than a standalone piece of legislation, which the Maryland contingent could stop from reaching the floor for a vote. The NFL could step in and lobby for this, but the district has no leverage to force it. The Commanders, and more importantly, the NFL, have stronger voices to push the procedure. And also, there's this part of the picture, too. It's how much money does the district have to kick into this. He writes, after giving Monumental Sports and Entertainment owner Ted Leonsis $500 million to fix up his Capital One Arena and the surrounding area, the city is not in a position to give any money for a new football stadium and has virtually no borrowing power. That means they will have to create some form of quasi-government body, such as a stadium authority, not just for the stadium, but for the use of 100 acres to issue bonds or create a vehicle for financing. See, it's not just the city just can't stroke a check for $1 billion to do this. And as far as ownership kicking in money, they're going to kick in some because stadiums are no longer built for under $1 billion. In fact, the going rate is over $2 billion. Even the one in Buffalo, which had been projected of a cost of $1.5 billion, that's now going over to $2.1 billion, over $500 million in cost overruns because of delays and so forth. So, as Tom writes at the end of his column, and I think this is still a real possibility, Maryland still remains the path of least resistance. The district hopes the NFL can clear its path quickly for a new home, but again, there's no guarantee for this. And the commissioner has said that he would like to have it in the district. I think the league would like to have it there, close to Congress, and also the look of it. I mean, that was a great look when the blimp shot showed you all the monuments around the stadium. You can't do that in Landover. But it's just because it cleared this last hurdle doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, and there are other things that stand in the way of it that we all have to be aware of. And I think that, at this point, it's still quite possible that the new stadium is going to be built on the land which the team owns in Landover. They would just build it closer to the Morgan Boulevard Metro, which would be helpful, but it wouldn't be quite as close, I'm told, as the way it works with RFK, where you can basically just hop off the Metro and walk around that corner a block and a half and you're at the stadium. That wouldn't be the case. So there's a lot that has to still happen. That was a nice move the other day. It moves it in the right direction. But to say that it's a slam dunk that the stadium is now going to be built in D.C., we're a long way away from that. Coming up, the coaching go-round. There's going to be new coaches in the league. Count on it. Happens every year. We already know that the Jets have fired their coach. The Saints have fired their coach. I think maybe one or two others I'm missing here. But usually there's 6 or 7 openings. And the question is, who will fill them? Will it be Bill Belichick? Maybe in one of them, one of the spots. Is there a college coach besides Deion Sanders that could be in play? We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We will, at the end of the season, hear a variety of names thrown around to be the next head coaches in the NFL. The Shanahan tree, I guess, is still bearing fruit. There's still plenty of names being circulated to fill the jobs, but the Deion speculation is getting interesting. He's now in play, maybe not just for the Cowboys, but for other teams, and he would come as a package deal with Shedeur Sanders, his son, who might be the first quarterback taken in the draft, maybe even number one overall, and that Deion would go with him. Who knows? But there's also other college coaches who may be in play, and it's interesting that some say about Deion, well, he knows the league. He was a star player. He will understand how to coach in the NFL, even though he's never coached in the NFL before. He's coached in high school. He's coached in college now in 2 different places, and has done an excellent job, obviously, with Colorado to have them in the playoff picture. But the fact that he's got experience in the NFL will make sure that he won't, be overwhelmed by that. He'll be able to handle it. Well, let me tell you about a guy named Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier was long-term a better college coach than Deion. He won a national championship at Florida. He won at Duke, for God's sakes. And while he was not a star in the NFL like Deion, he did win a Heisman Trophy at Florida and was a backup in the NFL for about 10 or 11 years and started some with the 49ers and started for the 0-16 Buccaneers. But he played a long time in the NFL. Playing in the NFL and coaching in the NFL are 2 different things. And just because Deion was a star player doesn't mean that he will be able to package his college coaching experience with his pro playing experience and be successful at the NFL level. But with, all kinds of things in play and owners looking at every possibility, there are college coaches besides Deion Sanders who might be in the mix. And Mel Kiper talked about them yesterday on our morning show here on Sportsmanlike.
Well, the name you hear, Chris, is Dan Lanning for the job he's done, certainly at Oregon. I think it's always going to be, based on recent history here. What's happened of late is it's not been that good. There's been some misses. Jimmy Johnson, look what he did coming into the Dallas Cowboys. So maybe they figure, okay, I work with Jimmy. Let's see what happens with another coach. But Dan Lanning's name has come up. Ironically, you have the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick, sitting out there. And is Bill Belichick going to jump into one of these opportunities? I would think he would. He wants that record. He wants a NFL winning team that's already set to not just have to be rebuilt for 3-4 years or 2 to 3 years, but a team that without injuries being a factor, we can get some good luck on that front, with the injury front. We have a team that could maybe make a huge jump up. So I think the Bill Belichick scenario is going to be interesting to follow. But I'll say of the college coaches, the one you hear I think the most right now is Dan Lanning, with Deion Sanders obviously being the one, because everybody talks about him going to Dallas and all that. I've always said I could see maybe Deion with the Raiders more so than Dallas. I think Belichick makes sense. They went for Parcells. I know everybody says, well, Jerry wants to have all the praise coming to him. But, well, he brought in Parcells. He wants to win. I love Jerry Jones. I love George Steinbrenner because they want to win. Mm-hmm. And he will do whatever it takes. And Bill Belichick's sitting out there. He gave McCarthy another year. This year didn't work out. Injuries had a lot to do with that, but they were losing before Dak got hurt. But I do think Deion Sanders to the Raiders would be a possibility because Tom Brady is involved in that whole process now. Shedeur Sanders, somebody I think they would want to get. So maybe Deion and Shedeur are somebody they would prefer to get. Whether they get them or not depends upon where they're picking, because right now they're at 5, and you would think right now Shedeur Sanders some way, somehow is going to be the number 1 pick in this draft.
Well, Mel, let's stick with Shedeur for a second. So a lot of teams want to bring in that rookie quarterback to help change the culture like we're talking about. You have Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward as 1 and 2 as the top 2 quarterback prospects on your big board. What's the gap from a talent perspective between those 2 quarterbacks?
Talent-wise, Michelle, not much. I mean, Cam can move around. He can do those pirouette moves. He can spin. He can roll left, roll right. He'll take chances. He'll be a little reckless. He can make any throw. He's played at 3 different schools and played at a very high level. Shedeur just has that it factor. He just has it. He's got a lot of that. I always say he's got a lot of Burrow and Goff in him. And if you want to sprinkle in a little Tom Brady from his days at Michigan, he's got that ability in the pocket to sense things and had that innate ability to feel pressure and move and slide and just so accurate with the football. Shedeur, the mindset of Shedeur, and the toughness. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a tougher collegiate quarterback. He's taken as many hits as he has that keeps going back for more and doesn't shy away. Never comes a little gun shy. Never looks like it affects him mentally or physically. I love Shedeur. I have him at 7 on the big board. I'm at 1, but we know quarterbacks always get a little overdrafted. If you go to Cam Ward right now, he's at 11. So 7 and 11 is quarterbacks, but you can bet that they're going to go higher than that. And like I said, I think Shedeur does go number 1 because he is going to – people are going to draw comparisons to a Burrow. Burrow said, he's not a guy who can beat you with his legs. Yes, he can. Going 3rd down, he will beat you. He will beat you with his ability to run and get that first down. You look at Jared Goff. You look at the accuracy of Goff. You look at what Tom Brady was able to do in the pocket. I think Shedeur Sanders goes number 1 because people see a little bit of all those quarterbacks.
Mel, is Shedeur, obviously you've praised him like crazy here, is he good enough to supplant an incumbent that we at one point had belief in, i.e. Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, teams that have quarterbacks that are going to be drafting really high up? Could Shedeur be a better answer for those teams than the incumbents?
And it's a great question. I would say no. And I've praised him, and I've brought up different comps. And people say, well, he should be the number. He should be one of your generational quarterbacks. He's not right now. And looks like Tom Brady was almost say Mr. Irrelevant was Brock Purdy. Tom Brady was the end of the 6th round in a compensatory pick when New England took a corner from Virginia in the 6th round ahead of Tom Brady. So he wasn't Mr. Irrelevant, but he was at the end of the 6th round with a comp pick. And you think about, Jared Goff went number 1 overall, right? But Joe Burrow went number 1 overall. So kind of mixing in a lot of different guys there, but Shedeur's number 7 on the board. He's not number 1. Travis Hunter is number 1 on the big board. But like I say, quarterbacks are going to go. He's going to go number 1. But they say you're going to take him if you have those. No, you're not. Jacksonville is not taking a quarterback when they have Trevor Lawrence. Certainly Dallas is great with Dak coming off the injury. Hopefully he's back playing like Dak did. So, no, those teams know, but I think Tennessee, they have Levis. Levis has had his moments, but he's not Brian Callahan's guy. Probably they go quarterback, just like with the Giants we know will. The Raiders we know will. Carolina's got to figure it out. So I think you're going to see teams looking to move up. If Jacksonville remains at that number 1 spot, they would probably want Travis Hunter. How far can they move down and still get Hunter? They couldn't certainly move to 5 with the Raiders and get him. Travis Hunter is going to go, I think, in the top 3 of this draft. The one common positional need area for the top teams in this draft, the top 10, is offensive tackle, wide receiver, edge, and quarterback. Those are the 4 positions everybody in the top 10, or the majority, need help at. So those are the positions. There's no wide receiver unless you say Travis is, because he's a corner wide receiver. So he'd be number 1 at wide receiver. Offensive tackle, Kelvin Banks Jr., Texas, hasn't had a great final year. Edge is Abdul Carter, Penn State, Michael Williams, Georgia, and Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. So there are some guys at that spot that makes sense. And then at the quarterbacks, Shador goes 1. Does Cam Ward get pushed up into that top 5? Maybe he does.
Okay, so a little draft yak from Mel at the end, but also speculation about college coaches becoming pro coaches. And Deion at the top of the list, with Michael Irvin saying, that there's interest in him and it could be a possibility. He goes to Dallas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Frank Isola was in for Tony yesterday on PTI. He and Mike Wilbon kicked around the whole Deion situation.
Coach Prime addressing the speculation that he could leave Colorado to coach the Cowboys. Sanders told reporters yesterday, Coach, a quote, "I'm happy where I am. I've got a kickstand down. I love it here. We're going to be here for a while. We ain't going nowhere. We're about to get comfortable." Close quote. Frank, what do you hear in Coach Prime's remarks?
All right, the one thing about the metaphor, Mike, you and I, we rode bikes when we were kids, and when you put the kickstand down, it takes about a split second to kick it back up and move on. So I think Deion was being smart here. There's no if this could potentially happen, what is the point of saying it now when your team could potentially be in the college football playoffs? So if he's going to be connected to maybe the Cowboys, maybe they draft his son. Michael Irvin has come out and said he's got a source. We don't guess sources in this business, but maybe it's an owner, maybe it's a coach of a team in Colorado that could be a source. So maybe something there is at play. Deion, sometimes he drives you nuts because all he wants to do is talk about himself. I actually think he handled this really well because you know what? There's no sense of talking about it now because you have a job to do. You're asking your players to do a job, so you have to do a job as well.
Frank, I'm not going to disagree with any of that. And he reserves the right to change his mind. I mean, we all do.
Of course.
Particularly when it comes to, we often do, when it comes to another job, another opportunity. Suppose his son is drafted by the Cowboys. He'd be crazy not to seriously consider going to do that if Jerry Jones puts in that call. And Michael Irvin look, you and I dealt a lot, and I dealt a lot with Deion and Michael Irvin because I was covering the NFL when those guys were in their prime, pun intended. And they're candid. You may not like what they say sometimes, but they are candid. And in my experience, they look at you and they tell you what they're thinking for real without much in the way of agenda. So I believe Michael Irvin has heard exactly what he's heard, but I believe Deion looks at this and says, you know what? There might be another college out there, Florida State alma mater, that hasn't really shown me enough love quite yet, and they might in the future. But Frank, Colorado is at least as good a situation, I think a better one to coach and contend nationally than Florida State. I don't think Deion has to leave and go anywhere to put a great product on the field in the day of NIL and transfer portal. He can stay there, leave the kickstand down, and do a whole lot of winning.
Don't you think he's going to have a lot of people bidding for him?
A few.
There's going to be other
programs. A few that make sense. Yeah. But Colorado, pretty attractive place to be right now if you're Coach Prime.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this, and Colorado, he's done a great job there, and he can probably stay there for quite a while. That was a program that was 1-10 2 years ago. So whatever he's done in those 2 years to not only win games but put the program on the map has been phenomenal. But if you follow Deion's history, he doesn't stay that long in one place. He went to Atlanta. He got it so he could play baseball in the offseason, played for the Yankees, played for the Braves. Then he got himself out of Atlanta because he didn't think they were winning enough, and he got himself to the Dallas Cowboys. He got himself to the San Francisco 49ers first. He won a Super Bowl with the 49ers, and then he went to the Cowboys, and then he came here, and he played okay for a year in 2000. And then Marty Schottenheimer came in, and he said, I don't trust Marty as far as I could throw him, tried to resuscitate his baseball career, then sat out, I think, 3 full NFL seasons, came back with the Baltimore Ravens. Then after his football playing career ended, he started a school in Dallas, a kind of a phony baloney school that got shut down. Then he went to, Jackson State, which was an interesting move for somebody of his stature to go coach at that level. And he did a great job there. They won games, and now he's at Colorado. But if you think after 2 years that he's settling in, I think the kickstand analogy is 100% correct. Yes, a kickstand is meant so you can hop on your bike quickly, kick it out, and get moving. It's not meant that you settle down. A kickstand is just a temporary rest, and that's, I think, where he is right now. And as I mentioned, there's no guarantee if he goes to the pros that he's going to be successful. Because, as I mentioned, Steve Spurrier was around the NFL a long time and as a player. And he even coached in the USFL. So it wasn't like he had never been a professional coach before. But clearly, when he got to the NFL, he didn't understand how it worked. And there were like stories where he called Marvin Lewis, who was the defensive coordinator, who was hired by Dan Snyder, not by Steve Spurrier, and he said, which practice field would you like to use there? And he said, hey, Steve, we only have 53 players on the roster. We don't have 100 like you do in college. So we don't have separate practice fields. We have to practice against each other. Oh, okay. So Deion maybe a little more savvy than that. Okay. Might understand that a little bit better. But again, just because he played in the league doesn't mean making the next step up that he'll be successful. And, Deion was a guy who created a lot of attention for himself when he was a player. Will he be comfortable with players on his team doing that? I don't think there's any guarantee of that either. So that's one to keep an eye on. All right, that was yesterday. What I just played from Pardon the Interruption, which has now celebrated 23 years. Last month was 23 years since they started in October of 2001, and kind of a spin-off or a show that preceded them for now 22 years, Around the Horn, because that came along a little bit later. That came around in 2002. And Max Kellerman, who used to be a regular with me a couple of years ago, he was doing the morning show. He was the original host of it. And I don't know whether it was a contract dispute or whatever, but he wound up leaving. And Tony Reale, who got his start, this is a great story, he got his start working on Around the Horn not Around the Horn, but Pardon the Interruption, as a researcher, and they needed somebody to fill in. They didn't think he was going to be the permanent guy, and he's been on ever since. So Tony's been doing it over 20 years, and unfortunately, this report from the New York Post from Ryan Glasspiegel that the show is going to be canceled in the summer of 2025. So it's got another, 7-8 months to go. And what they're reporting is they're looking to put a new show in its place. I don't know, maybe the ratings are bad, whatever. It can't be a very expensive show to produce because they rely on writers. Kevin Blackistone, a friend of mine, is a regular on there. And you see others who have been on, Woody Page and some of the others who've been there for many, many years. But according to this report, the show will end. Aaron Solomon is the producer. George Solomon, the longtime sports editor of the Washington Post, is his dad. I'm sure Aaron will wind up with something else and maybe will produce the show that takes his place. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tony Reale is involved in the new show because he's really good on television. I would think that they're maybe working on a new vehicle for him. There is no mention of Pardon the Interruption, which is really interesting because Tony is 76 and Wilbon is 66. Yet, they still bring it when they appear together and appear with other people. And, I guess the ratings are still very good. There's no mention of any thing about the future, pardon the interruption. So those guys may keep going for quite a while. I've said this in the past. I started working with Tony. I don't think he was quite 44 years old. He was in his 43 or 44. And here he is, 30 years later, more than 30 years later. He's still got the same energy. Now, the show is only half an hour. There's that. But even, doing radio, I used to do, at some point, we did 3 hours. We did 2 hours a lot of the time. He's still got it. And I applaud them for what they do. I never miss a show. I always eat my dinner about the time of Pardon the Interruption. And that's apparently going to roll on. But Around the Horn will come to an end, according to the New York Post, at the end of the year. And I wish the best for the people on there, including the writers who appear on a regular basis. I'm sure that's become a big part of their lives and income and so forth and so on. And having been laid off a number of times in my life, let me tell you, it ain't fun. It ain't fun. All right. I said this to a couple of colleagues today, that Dan Snyder being out of the NFL now, this is his second season out, thank God, and his exit has turned the spotlight onto other owners, and not in a positive way. Like, it used to be, yeah, your owner's bad, but at least he's not Dan Snyder. Well, Dan Snyder no longer roams the NFL. He's gone. And Jerry Jones has created a mess in Dallas. And what Woody Johnson has done with the New York Jets, I mean, Woody Johnson would have gotten a little bit of a pass if Dan Snyder were still around. But what he has done with this Aaron Rodgers situation is an absolute travesty. And it was reported the other day by Diana Rossini, used to be with Channel 4 here and ESPN, and now is with The Athletic, and reporting with Zach Rosenblatt, working together. They reported that Woody Johnson wanted Aaron Rodgers benched after the fourth game of the season and had to be talked out of it by the coaching staff. And when he fired Robert Saleh, he didn't even tell the general manager, Joe Douglas, who he just fired this past week. I mean, he's made an absolute mess of things. And yesterday, Rosenblatt was on the Dan Patrick Show explaining just how Woody operates.
He focuses on results over process all the time. Like, I know Bill Belichick kind of made fun of him and said he goes ready, fire, aim all the time. And I think that's kind of where he's at. So he's like, okay, we love Aaron Rodgers. He has a bad game against the Broncos. Okay, why is Aaron Rodgers bad? And, Aaron Rodgers has a good game. They move on. They trade for Devontae Adams. And it's like week by week, day by day with him a lot of the time, I think. I don't think he sees the full picture. I think he looks at what's right in front of him. And that's why over the years, when the Jets have had like a good season, like in 2015, they go 10-6, they go all in that offseason, it fails. 2022 this year, the last couple years ago, they started off really well, looked like they had some promise, went all in Aaron Rodgers, and you understand why they did, but it obviously did not work out.
Is this an attractive job, being the head coach of the Jets in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question they're going to have to answer. I would say if you're stacking it up with the other jobs that are likely going to be available, I don't think it would be the most appealing. Like if you're looking at like a Mike Vrabel, a Ben Johnson, these guys that are going to be at the top of every list, if you're weighing two situations, are you going to go to an organization that, number one, probably doesn't have a quarterback, and you have an owner who meddles, and who knows who the GM is going to be? There's a lot against it. They do have talent on this team. There's things you can build around, but there's a lot of factors that are going to be held against them as these coaches are weighing, Jets or, Cowboys, Jets or whatever it is, Jaguars, like these teams. Like you have to weigh that part of it for sure.
The quarterbacking situation moving forward, will Aaron Rodgers be the quarterback next year in your opinion?
I don't think so. I think there was a point where Aaron himself would have said that he'd only come back if there's some continuity, whether it's Jeff Ulbrich or Joe Douglas or Saleh before that. If they came back, he'd come back. Everybody's gone now. Ulbrich's not coming back as the head coach. And then on top of that, I don't know that Woody wants Aaron back next year. So I think it might be a mutual parting. It's just crazy how quickly the tone changes around here because, you hear Aaron Rodgers, I believe in January, where he's saying, I could play 3 or 4 more years. And, it does not look like he's going to last that long.
Because I don't know where they're going to be in the draft and if they're going to draft a quarterback again. How big a cap hit is Aaron Rodgers if he doesn't come back?
So he doesn't have any guaranteed money left after this year. They would have a big dead cap hit that they'd have to inherit if they cut him, but that's money already paid to him. So he only has a $20 million cap hit next year. So ultimately it's not a huge deal if they move on from him. But, they don't have a lot of options. It's not a great free agency class, not supposed to be a great draft class. So it's not like the best year to be needing a quarterback, I would say.
Well, we're offering up Sam Darnold, Zach, because Minnesota move on from him with J.J. McCarthy. Can we bring Sam Darnold back to the scene of the crime where he played with the Jets and now he's going to play with the Giants? What do you think?
I mean, that would be something. I just don't see Sam putting himself in that position again, though.
Is it just a poorly run organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the track record, just look at the facts. It's 14 years they haven't made the playoffs, and that's the most out of any North. It will be 14 at the end of the season, I should say, and that'll be the most of any of the four more North American sports, the major sports. So that's a level of futility that literally nobody else is dealing with at the moment. And ultimately, they've shuffled through coaches, quarterbacks, GMs, and it remains the same. So it obviously starts at the top with the person who's been there the whole time.
Yeah. So Woody has really screwed this up, and it just feels funny to sit here after chronicling the entire Dan Snyder era, all 24 messy years of it, to look around and go, oh boy, that's bad. That's bad. And I'm sure from the view from other cities, oh man, Dan Snyder, he's made a mess of things, and nobody's going to the games anymore. And the ones that show up are rooting for the other team. And oh man, look at this investigation by the Washington Post, the toxic culture, and he's hiding on his yacht, and man, and he's gone. That's out of here. And now it's the focus on Woody Johnson. These guys need Dan Snyder, right? They need him, because now they are the ones that have become the ones that we used to. The ways we used to describe Dan Snyder, that's how they're being described. So John Elway was really, really good at playing quarterback. He was really, really good at getting Peyton Manning to play the last 4 years of his career in Denver. And he was really, really bad in picking a successor to Peyton Manning. But he knows a thing or two about quarterbacking, and he knows something about what it's like to struggle at the beginning of a career and then go on to become one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. And he was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday. We'll play some of that conversation coming up. And Earl the Pearl Monroe, not the one who played with the New York Knicks, but the one who played in Baltimore, worth remembering, and a terrific feature story today in the Washington Post, which I will go through with my own thoughts, because when I first started to watch basketball, Earl was playing for the Baltimore Bullets. And I went to my first NBA game with my dad at the old Civic Center, where people were allowed to smoke. So by like the third quarter, and I think we were sitting in the upper part of the arena, the Civic Center, there would be this ring of smoke around it. It's hard to imagine that in a indoor venue, especially outdoor stadiums. Of course, you could smoke, but an indoor venue, you were allowed to smoke. But that was the way it was in the 1960s. But I saw Earl play in person with Gus Johnson, Wes Unseld, I think, was a rookie that year, and that was really cool. And Channel 5 used to televise maybe 20 Bullet games a year, and I would watch on my 13-inch black and white as Jim Carvelis did the play-by-play, and that was a romantic period for me, growing up watching basketball at that time. It's tough to watch for me now. It really is. It's a three-point shooting game, and it's great that you have the HD TV, 65 inches, blah, blah, blah. It looks great, but the game itself is not what it was. And the way Earl played below the rim, if you got YouTube videos of it, watch it, because it was something to see. And he's probably a forgotten superstar, because he gave up his game, really. That's what happened when he went to the New York Knicks. It was a contract dispute, and it's hard to imagine this, but the Bullets traded him to a division rival when he was unhappy about his contract in 1971, sent him over to the Knicks for two good, not great players. Dave Stallworth, journeyman forward, and Mike Reardon, who became a starter with them, was a starter on their 75 team that got swept in the finals by Golden State, but Mike Reardon was no substitute for Earl Monroe. So we'll get to that coming up. It's Dallas week, as you know, and we got a little bit of a twist now. The last coach, who was last coordinator, that came here from Dallas as a head coach. You could say that there was that one good year in 1999, so, he did kind of deliver on the idea that they were rebuilding under Norv. But I always thought as a head coach, Norv Turner underachieved. He was revered in Dallas. I mean, Troy Aikman credits his Hall of Fame career to Norv Turner. That's how much he thinks of Norv. And Norv was very successful as an offensive coordinator in other places, and he did get a Chargers team with Phillip Rivers to the AFC Championship game, but I always thought would come up short in big games. We'll see what happens with Dan Quinn. He's already had experience as a head coach, which Norv did not have when he came here. Quinn, of course, took Atlanta to the Super Bowl and then suffered that horrific collapse against the Patriots, and then kind of rehabbed in Dallas and learned some things. And he always talks about how along the way he's picked up things from other people. He's constantly evaluating himself. And yesterday was a time to get a little bit reflective with the Cowboys in town. And Dan Quinn talking about his experience as the defensive coordinator in Dallas.
I learned a hell of a lot there. So there's probably certainly a lot from Mike and coaching and running a program and practice schedules. And he was very thoughtful about how he laid things out from an installation schedule of practice. So those were things I just watched. In fact, I kept a book, of things that I liked, in my desk drawer. That's a good deal. And I would write that in. On the personnel side, with Will McClay and the Joneses, there were certain ways about, free agency and draft and a process that it goes through that when you see something done really well, you want to take note of it. And so to see a guy like Will or the Joneses execute that part of things, another thing that goes into the book, that's a good process. And so coming into here, for me, it was more applying some of the processes on the coaching side that I could with the staff. And then fortunately, obviously with Adam here, I got to, be part of what he was building, from the personnel side. So it was incredibly valuable time for me.
And Mike being Mike McCarthy, who will be on the opposite sideline on Sunday here. And it's, I guess you call it a chess match, and here's how he views it.
And it happens around the league, of guys that you keep up with, at different spots along the way. And Mike's like a phenomenal coach. I learned so much from him in a lot of different ways, both on the field and off the field. So I know that you know that, and he has that same, thoughts about some of the things that we've done. So there is a chess match, but at the end, it's the guys executing and playing it out. And so that's a number one, top of the pile, our execution, the speed at which we play. And so that's a number one at the top.
Also, the roster has turned over. So, it's not like the old days of the Cowboys and the Redskins rivalry where players, the star players especially, stayed on the team for a long time, some of them a decade or more. So when you have a player like Brian Robinson, who's now in his third year with the team, right? Third year. He's a longtime vet. And, they turned over half the roster. Adam Peters looked at it and went, so he brought in 30 new guys. And some of them have played in Dallas, so they know the other side of this rivalry. But this is Robinson talking about yesterday about how he's had to kind of educate his teammates on it.
The energy itself, is exciting. It's one to want to play for. So, I just expect, our side of the fan base to, show up and show out, So, I'm excited to see how everybody responds to it, and Sunday going to be fun.
Have any of the guys on the team who weren't here last year, you kind of had to explain kind of what this means, or did they kind of get the idea because it's such a historic rivalry?
I think guys understand the idea, but they're not going to know until Sunday when they really see, how they come and how the fans pull up and how excited the fans be about it. So I think Sunday will be the real experience for him.
Now he's had 2 of these games in Washington, and I would say that a significant portion of the crowd, if not the majority of the crowd, was Dallas. Right? I mean, last year too. And Dallas, the last 3 years, has won 12 games. They've been a good regular season team. And Dallas has won 5 of the last 6 games played in this so-called rivalry, which really isn't that anymore. But what he's saying there, he's I'm going to be interested to see how the fans pull up, meaning how much burgundy are we going to see and how much blue and silver are we going to see? Now, this has been very interesting over the years, how this rivalry has been. Yes, there have been like the NFC Championship game in January of '83 where the stands shook. And I would say that of the 55,000 that were there, less than 1,000 were rooting for the Cowboys for sure. But, away from the stadium, there has always been a strong Dallas rooting interest. And people have argued for years, Cowboys, Redskins, and it goes back to when the Cowboys came in the league in 1960, the Redskins were segregated. They had no black players, and they had no black players in 61 either. And I think a lot of people looked at the Cowboys as a team that they could root for with an integrated roster and some great black players on it, and Washington being all white. And that led to kind of even when the glory days happened, even in the 1980s when the Redskins were the dominant team and won classic games against the Cowboys, and going back to New Year's Eve of 1972 when they beat the Cowboys to get to the Super Bowl for the first time. Those were years where you had a significant fan base here for Dallas. And so in the last few years anyway, maybe 5, 6, with the way Dan Snyder disintegrated this fan base, that the Cowboy fans bought up the tickets. And if you had a full house, which they didn't always have at FedEx Field, and it was a Dallas game, 75% were rooting for the Cowboys. Well, the Cowboys stink now. They're a mess. And Washington's very exciting, and it's a year that they should make the playoffs, and they got the best rookie quarterback in the league and maybe a guy who can be here for a long, long time. How many of those tickets are going to wind up in the hands of Washington fans? I was at the Bears game, and it looked like there was a significant number of fans there rooting for Washington, maybe 75%. But I'm told, and I was not at the game, but the Steelers game, and the Steelers always travel well, that it was probably along the lines maybe 65 to 70% Steeler fans. Okay, that's not what you want, but the Steelers don't come here every year. The Cowboys do. And so what he says is, I'm going to be interested to see how they pull up. I think that's going to indicate, to him how much things are moving in the direction of Washington and away from this, home away from home for the Dallas Cowboys. And that's something that is going to be something I think is going to be interesting to watch coming up on Sunday. How many there are going to be wearing burgundy, and how many are going to be wearing blue and silver. As for back to on the field, Micah Parsons back healthy for the Cowboys. We've seen him come in here and be an absolute game wrecker. This will be the first experience for Jayden Daniels against Micah Parsons, but obviously he's been well prepared for it.
Micah's a game changer. Everybody knows that. Everybody sees that. They move him around so he can impact the game in different ways. He might move from a 3 technique to rush in, stand up, might stand straight up over the center. So they move him around a lot to get him on some matchups. But, you got to always be aware of a guy like that. You don't let game records wreck the game. So obviously we got to go out there and identify where he's at, but we got to go out there and execute our game plan too.
I covered Lawrence Taylor in his prime. Taylor could absolutely dominate a game. One of his most incredible performances was he had a dislocated shoulder, and with one arm he dominated a Sunday night game against the New Orleans Saints. Parsons is close to that. He may be not at that level, but he's a guy that obviously you have to keep an eye on the entire game. They're not a good team, and you got 34 points hung on them by C.J. Stroud on Monday night at home. So I would expect the Commanders to win this game, but he is somebody that you have to worry about. Meantime, up the road with the Giants, the inevitable has happened there. Daniel Jones has been moved to 4th string. He'll never take another snap for them. He had a $23 million injury guarantee, meaning that if it got to the league year in next year, that in March, that if he was injured, they would be on the hook for his entire salary. And or the $23 million. So they don't want to have that. They're done with him. And the surprise this week was not that they did not go with Drew Lock, who was brought in on a 1-year, $5 million deal to be Daniel Jones' backup on a team that presumably would contend for the playoffs. And now that they are not starting Drew Lock. It's Tommy DeVito. And Tommy DeVito was kind of a fun sensation last year. Now, he did beat Washington, but almost everybody else did. They won only 4 games. But he started 6 games for them, went 3-3. But more importantly for the New York fan base, he was a cult hero. He was living at home, making less than $1 million a year, undrafted free agent out of Illinois. The Jersey kid who's doing great things at the Meadowlands. And, he was Tommy Cutlets, and his family was holding these big tailgate parties and giving everybody cutlet sandwiches and the whole thing. And he said, that's not happening this year. He said, last year was a good story and all how it happened, all the fun and games outside. It was fun. That was last year. I'm sticking to football now. Not that I wasn't before. The external stuff will be on pause. I already had talks with everybody around me, my inner circle. Want to stay very tight and make sure that everything is about production on Sunday. Meaning, Mom, don't have the tailgate party, okay, Ma? You can make me the Tommy Cutlet sandwiches when I come home, but don't do that. He had 8 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in the 6 starts. That's pretty good. And the question is about Locke. Do you fear that maybe he'll win too many games and hurt your draft position? I don't know. Obviously, he's not in their plans for next year. Maybe they're going to find out if Tommy DeVito can do it. I don't know. But it leaves them in an interesting situation in the locker room. They're already looking around at Daniel Jones with as poorly as he's played. Most of the players feel like he gives them the best chance to win. And the second best chance to win, Drew Lock, an experienced veteran, is not playing. And he said yesterday, he didn't really hide it that much. He said he figured that when he was signed with the Giants, he was the number 2 quarterback. So that when they called the roll, he would get to play. But he's not playing. But he said, my disappointment will not show one bit around anyone in this facility or after the meeting upstairs, meaning that he was talked to by Brian Daboll, the coach, and general manager Joe Shane. He said, I expressed this point up there. My job is to compete, keep rolling, and be the guy. He said, I'll handle it like a pro. I'll be a professional. It's something I pride myself in. I'm not going to be the guy that tears apart the locker room. I think the locker room is automatically torn apart because I think, even though Tommy DeVito did win 3 games for them last year, I think they got to be looking around and saying, well, every time we take the field, we're trying our best to win. Management may think, okay, the season is shot. We're looking to next year. But my job as a professional, if I'm not going to play here, I want to put my best performance on tape for somebody else next year so I can make the most money. And you're going with the 3rd-string quarterback because – for whatever reason, maybe you're looking to next year already that you want to see if Tommy DeVito can be your backup maybe, or the bridge quarterback if you're going to draft somebody and have Tommy DeVito start some games. So that's a terrible situation. But the good thing for the Giants is they can look over to the Jets and they're in an even worse situation. Football season ending before Thanksgiving in New York with 2 teams. It's remarkable. People, I guess, have moved on to the Knicks and probably are even starting to talk spring training baseball. And, of course, the Juan Soto continuing story. Will he re-sign with the Yankees? Will he go someplace else? Or will he stay in New York and sign with the Mets? We shall see. All right, that will do it for me. We got Bram coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.